Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the Improvement Podcast. So today I'm going to touch on, should training change while dieting? And for the most part, no. So the reason being is what has built the muscle is going to be what's going to retain the muscle. Saying that, there is some exceptions, so which is why this episode's going to be a thing, because if the answer was just no, then I wouldn't really have much to talk about. So, yeah, most things shouldn't. Most things should stay the same. You shouldn't flip your training on its head when you enter a dieting phase. That's probably the worst thing you could do. You should keep everything pretty similar, pretty consistent. But like I said, there's some exceptions to the rule, which is what I'll go over. So, first of all, the first thing that I believe is a reasonable reason to potentially change things when you're dieting is when you may want to swap to more stable movements. And the reason being is when body weight drops, so when you get lighter, which will obviously happen during a dieting phase, stabilizing movements become harder. So movements, let's say like the dumbbell press, you'll find they're a lot more wobbly. You can't be as tight, and you might find that when you're doing things like the dumbbell press or like a bench press with a barbell or any other movement, specifically it happens more on push movements. You'll find it as well on movements like a Romanian deadlift or standard deadlift. It's just harder to keep your tightness and keep nice and like tight and maintain your form. So yeah, the reason being is, like I said, your body weight drops. We don't have as much body fat, which can help us basically be more stable. And for the most part, weight does move weight to an extent, meaning if you've got more body fat on you, you'll generally find it's easier to lift movements. You're more efficient at doing so. But when, let's say, we're doing a dumbbell press and we're dieting, we're dropping weight, once you drop like a significant amount of weight, you'll find the stability might be the limiting factor. And what I mean by this is your chest will not be what stops you from performing another rep, which we want. And the reason we want this is when we think about what our goal is with a movement when trying to target a muscle, it's obviously to take it to failure or close to failure, depending on your training style. But if we can't do that, and if the limiting factor is stability, then we're not going to be able to get as much muscle retention as possible and progress and maybe even build muscle, depending on what stage you are in your training in terms of how experienced you are. But yeah, if stability is the limiting factor, the muscle you're trying to target isn't. So this can, like I said, just lead to poorer muscle retention, which we obviously don't want because we can't take that muscle closer to failure. So what do we do in this scenario if, let's say, a dumbbell press might not be great? So a good substitute could be, let's say, a chest press. So a chest press is going to be a bit more stable because the weight's only going to be going in one direction. Regardless of where you push the handles, how much your arms wobble, the machine's only going to be going in one direction. So it doesn't require as much stability. And in terms of if, let's say, you should substitute all movements, no, definitely not, because there's the benefits of working stability and working movements that cause you to need to balance. And if we don't do that, then we will limit ourselves from how much exercises we can do. We probably won't get as much out of each exercise because we'll be stuck to machines all the time. And there's benefits of using free weights and compound movements that aren't always on machines. So we shouldn't just do this on all movements. In terms of when you should potentially do this, you might not even have to during a dieting phase. Like if you're just losing a wee bit, if you're not getting super lean, then it might not be much of an issue. So you don't need to automatically swap it out. If let's say you're doing a dumbbell press, it feels good, you're retaining your numbers well, then there's no reason why you need to automatically swap it out. So if you find, let's say on the other hand, the dumbbells you use, you find them hard to balance, most of the time anyway, and you're finding they're extremely hard to balance, and now you're not performing well, you're not enjoying the movement as a result of it, and you don't really feel like you're working your chest a lot, then it might be a good idea. So this can apply to a high incline dumbbell press, incline, a flat press, or like I said, it's not just dumbbells, like a barbell bench press you could feel this, a overhead press as well, where you could potentially opt for a machine variation of it. Like just being in a Smith machine itself will do a lot of good. Because like I said, what's the goal when we're training? The goal isn't to dumbbell press such and such. The goal is to stimulate the muscle so it stays around, so it potentially grows. So yeah, that's why our focus should be on swapping to more stable movements sometimes. And as a whole, we should be creating stability anyway, so making ourselves nice and tight and still, basically. The reason being is when we're more stable, we can lift more, like I said, and we can do this through basically not just sitting on like a machine. Like for example, I done a post the other day when I'm doing like a flat Smith machine press. I won't just sit there and then just push the bar up and down. What I'm thinking about is driving my legs into the ground, focus on sliding myself up the bench, if that makes sense. I'm focusing on lifting my chest towards the bar. I'm focusing on rolling the bar down and then having a big breath of air and while I'm pressing, so that I'm as tight as possible. And a good example of how tight you should try and make yourself is if someone came over and tried to nudge you or push you, regardless of what exercise you're doing, your goal should be to be stable, to not move as a result of it. Obviously, let's say you're doing a deadlift, it's a wee bit different to an extent, but like in a Smith, like if I was doing a flat Smith machine, like bench press, if someone came over and tried to budge me, ideally I wouldn't move because I've got everything as tight as I can. I'm sprung up and I've got so much tension throughout my whole body that I'm really, really tight and stable. So yeah, one of the reasons why you might want to change things to diet when you're dieting is to swap into more stable environments, so you can retain numbers a bit better, performance a bit better, and muscle mass a bit better as a result of it. Another potential scenario where you might want to change something when you're dieting is if your recovery worsens. So again, just because let's say you start the first week of the diet, it doesn't mean your recovery automatically decreases, because it doesn't work like that. It depends what stage you are in a diet. For example, if you've got, let's say, a ridiculously low level of body fat, let's say you've got 4% body fat, or let's say even 3 or whatever, it doesn't really matter to be honest, or let's say you have 20% body fat, you're gonna be able to recover differently. The reason being is when we are 20% body fat, even if we've just entered the dieting phase, we've got so much fat stored. If we've finished a gaining phase, if we're a bit fluffier, then we've got so much fat stored which we can use as energy. And also when you start dieting, your sleep can sometimes improve as well, so your recovery might actually get better during the first half of the dieting phase, or the first portion of it. There's no set in stone time where your recovery starts to decrease, but yeah, at some point when you get leaner, you might find you don't quite recover as well. And how do we potentially know when this happens? How do we spot when we don't recover as well? So let's say you're dieting and you start to get sorer in the gym, and you don't quite get rid of that soreness before the next session, whereas before you only got sore a wee bit and you recovered in a day or two, then that's your recovery getting poorer. That's you not being able to recover from as much. So when you're in this situation, you may need to reduce the volume you're doing. So some people make the mistake of, when they're dieting, they do more. They think, oh, I'm dieting, I want to burn more calories, I'll do more sets. I'll do more to try and retain my muscle and that, to give a reason to stick around. But what happens when you do more? Let's say I'm training legs. Instead of doing one set, or instead of doing 2 sets, let's say I do 4. Then that means I'm not going to recover as well. I'll be sore going into my next session. Performance won't be as great that next session, and it'll just be a knock-on effect. As well as that, The more sets you do, the poorer your performance is. And it doesn't matter how much volume I do if my numbers are poor. So volume doesn't hold on to muscle, meaning doing 10 sets doesn't hold on to muscle. What holds on to muscle is retaining your performance on those sets and doing enough of that to hold on to muscle. So it shouldn't be just one or the other. It's having good intensity and effort to retain and progress, and then from there doing enough that you can retain your muscle but not too much that you're sore going into your next session. And if you aren't sore going into your next session and you don't feel like you're doing too much, you don't feel absolutely ridiculously battered at the end of your sessions, then you're fine. There's no need to decrease how much you're doing because I've said so in the podcast. Because like I said, this doesn't automatically take place as you enter diet. It might not happen for yourself, depends where you're at, and also how consistent you are as well with everything outside the gym. And in terms of why our recovery worsens when we're dieting, we're deficient in food. So the main tools we have to recover are basically our sleep and our nutrition. And one of them's just went out the window. One of them's gone. Obviously, we're not eating nothing, but we're eating less. Like I said, we're deficient in food, which is why we lose weight. So if you're deficient in food, you're deficient in energy, which we need to recover, basically. And going on to something else that you potentially may want to have a look at or potentially change when you're dieting is rep ranges. So when we are leaner, when we are lighter at body weight, we find it harder to stay tight. So like I said, during something like, we'll take a Romanian deadlift, something I'll be doing today, and I'm clinging on my performance for dear life with. It's going well so far actually, but it's definitely getting tougher to maintain that good form and maintain that neutral spine. It feels like I'm about to rack pull it when I'm taking it out of the rack. But yeah, when you get lighter and leaner, it's harder to stay tight, and as a result, keep good form. And when we can't keep good form, some rep ranges aren't as ideal as others because we can't brace as hard, we can't get as much tightness during the set using just ourself, if that makes sense, because we're not in a machine during something like a deadlift. So the only thing we can rely on is doing things like taking a big breath of air, making sure we're trying to maybe focus on bending the bar around us to engage our back, to pack our lats. We things like that to improve potentially how tight we are. But apart from that, we've not got machines or that we can use during a deadlift, or we could do a machine variation, but we're talking about a deadlift here. When you're doing it, a rep range of let's say 3 to 5 might not be ideal. And the reason being is the lower the weight, the harder it is to stabilize, because it's going to be a closer percentage of your 1 rep max and overall what you can do. And let's say your form does break down at the end of the set. We don't want that happening from the very start, if that makes sense. And that will probably happen with like a really low rep set. As you find, when you usually see like form breakdown is when folk are going for like a PR or a net max. So ideally we should stick to a wee bit of a higher rep range. And when we're in like, let's say, peak gaining phase, when we're at like middle of our bulk, end of our bulk, we're feeling great, we're feeling strong, we're feeling nice, and we can keep a lot of tightness and keep our form good during those movements. We've been doing them for a while, then we can go into those lower rep range to push up our strength so we can get into those rep ranges eventually when it comes to the higher reps. But when we're in a dieting phase, and ideally you want to stick to a bit of a lower rep range, something like maybe 8 to 15 is usually ideal, because you'll find when you're doing like a 3 rep set on, let's say, a deadlift, will that be the best for muscle retention? Will that be the best for keeping you injury free when you can't maintain as much or as good form? Will it be ideal in your joints? Probably not for all of those. Will it be ideal, let's say you're doing less because you can't recover from as much? Would it be ideal doing the sets you can recover from in that low rep range? Or would be being able to control it very well and have good form and let's say like a 8 to 10 rep range would probably be better? I think the 8 to 10 rep range would probably be better. And there's also, when I'm dieting, what I'm finding now is during my high rep sets, anecdotally, meaning from experience, I just don't have the same gas tank, the same endurance during sets. So I feel like I just burn out a bit more, probably because I don't have as much carbohydrates, I don't have as much available, I don't have full glycogen stores, which means like glucose from carbohydrates in my muscle. And as a result, I feel like I can't do as well in those higher rep ranges. So as a result, usually I feel that I can retain numbers best in like 8 to 15 rep range, maybe even a bit lower than 15. But due to this, I think it's, like I said, I think it's good staying there. I don't think doing 30 reps is ideal when you're on a diet. Yes, you can make some exceptions. Let's say you're doing lateral raises and you're doing a crazy drop set, because you can recover from it. That's a bit different. I'm saying for the main meat and potatoes portion of your work, the main bulk of your work, the main basic compound movements, I'd recommend sticking to around 8 to 15. And that's about it in terms of when your training should change. So basically, when your training should change is when it's got a reason to. If you've not got a good reason to justify changing your training, that makes sense, then it's probably not a good idea to change anything. Because when we change things, we're getting used to new movements. We can't express our true strength. We're not skilled at doing those movements. It'll be harder to target the muscle we're doing as effectively because we're not skilled at them and practiced them before. So yeah, if nothing's broke, don't try and fix it, simply. But yeah, hope this helps. And let me know if it did. If you've got any recommendations in terms of what episodes you'd like to see or topics you'd like covered, please let me know. And excuse my brain fog. I'm feeling a bit tired today on prep, to be honest. But 10 weeks out on Monday, so 2 days from when this is released, so we're definitely getting there, considering I started at, I believe, 25 weeks out. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Leave a rating and review if you can, and hope everyone has a great weekend.